This is my 1994 Lexus LS400 with a little over 160,000 miles, and this is me driving it into Road Atlanta. The big thing here is that I am in Missouri, nowhere near Atlanta. It's about a 550-mile drive either way, but that's where I went in this car to see Formula Drift recently. I've had a fairly long-time internet friend known as Mr. OHD or Keenan that has been going to this event for the past 3 or 4 years, and I've always said that I wanted to go, but time restraints or money restraints came up and I just couldn't make it. This year, I had the time and I had the money. While of course I do love visiting places and seeing the entire US in road trips, the biggest thing for me is always just being on the road trip. While the destination is of course important, I usually love the drive just as much or more. And that is of course why I decided to take a 3-day trip down to Atlanta. And a lot of this video is going to be more relating to the actual drive down compared to the actual event. I did think it was interesting for sure, but drifting is not really my thing per se. I've never been one to be like, oh, I want a drift car, or really even watch it that much on the internet. Like, it didn't really interest me all too much, but it was definitely really cool to see in person. And so let's get started with the trip down. The night before the trip started, I had to work sadly, so I was off work at about 11 p.m. and then I stayed up until about midnight and tried to fall asleep. Of course, being me, I didn't fall asleep until about 2 a.m. I then woke up to my alarm at about 5 a.m. and got ready, got headed down there by about 6. I stopped to get gas at a little gas station right down the road from me and then started heading south. I'll be the first to say that I absolutely hate driving through Illinois right next to St. Louis. 255, if you don't know, is quite possibly the worst highway I've ever driven on, which will come up later in this video for the trip back. But I decided to drive down Highway 55 here in Missouri all the way to Cape Girardeau and then headed over towards Paducah, Kentucky from there. But on the way to Paducah from Cape Girardeau, I actually ended up going through this little town in Illinois called Cairo. And I just thought it was really cool because it's really old-fashioned. There's a lot of abandoned buildings, and it's just a really neat kind of aesthetic to go through. It was definitely one of the more interesting places I drove through on the way down. I ended up just kind of driving through it though because I didn't really have time to stop. I was really wanting to get to the event in a decent amount of time since it is about an 8.5 to 9 hour drive. Directly after leaving Cairo, I actually ended up driving into Kentucky, which was a state I had never actually driven in myself before. I had rode with parents and a few other people with road trips, but I'd never actually driven through it myself. And really I have to say that the scenery wasn't that much different from Missouri. There were rolling hills and trees and just countryside, which is pretty much what we have here in Missouri. Of course, Illinois is flat, as you would expect. And then a few hours later, I made it to Paducah, Kentucky, which was a place I only really knew of because at my old work, there was an auction there that they used to go to all the time, and I had the option to drive down there once, I believe, but I turned it down for something else. I had to shoot some videos or something like that. But it was really in Paducah that things started getting streamlined. I got on Interstate 24, and that took me basically all the way straight to Atlanta. Of course, though, on the way I did stop in Nashville, Tennessee for some gas because it was pretty much the exact halfway point at about 280 miles. And I didn't really see much of Nashville, honestly. There was some cool signs and whatnot. But I drove around the actual downtown city area on the highway that I was on. So I didn't really get to see all too much. But pretty much as soon as I entered Tennessee, I started seeing the beautiful mountains of Tennessee. It was something I had never seen while driving, since I had never driven down that way. But I had seen the mountains before. About 10 years ago, we went down to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for a family trip with my parents. But this time was such a different experience because I'm 10 years older now. I'm not 13 years old. And I was actually driving into the mountains myself, which was so cool. And after Nashville, in between Nashville and Chattanooga, Tennessee, was where you drove through the craziest, the biggest mountains I had seen. Even though, of course, that wasn't anything compared to the actual Smoky Mountains, which are further east. And also going through Chattanooga, I experienced something that I wasn't expecting. I'd been driving in Tennessee, obviously, for a few hours at that point, and out of nowhere, I just see a sign that says, "Welcome to Tennessee." So it confused me at first, but then after I looked at the map later, I realized that Interstate 24 actually dips down into Georgia slightly, and then goes back up north into Chattanooga, and then goes back south into Georgia once again. It really confused me because I didn't know why it was welcoming me into Tennessee when I've been in Tennessee for hours and hours. And then here's really where the drive started getting interesting. So my goal was to get to Road Atlanta, which is about an hour or so east of Atlanta. The track itself is located within Brazelton, Georgia, which is a little ways east. And I didn't want to go through Atlanta to get there because I didn't really feel like driving through downtown Atlanta or anywhere near Atlanta. So my map actually had me go this really crazy like back road route, and I drove through probably 7 or 8 different little towns where I had to stop at stop signs and go 25 miles per hour and even stop for a school that was just letting out at the time that I was driving through. And well, it was really cool to see because I saw a ton of little towns. It was just really cool to see. It was definitely hindering my time that I needed to get to the track. It probably took me, probably another 35, 40 minutes just taking that route instead of the way I took back. But I eventually made it through there and eventually made it down to the racetrack. I pulled in, got my wristband, and we were ready to go in.